Hey everybody, Jay Super Awesome here. I'd like to welcome you all to week number 34 of the Horror Man Slashback Saturday Challenge. This week's slasher movie theme is 70s slashers, and I will be giving my review for The Demon. Okay, so getting into the plot for this one. A small rural town is terrorized by a bloodthirsty maniac. Women are stalked and made to experience their worst fears while being tortured to death. Not to be watched alone contains graphic violence, nudity, explicit language, and blood, and more blood. Okay, so getting into my thoughts for this one. With this week's Slashback Challenge theme of 70s slashers, I chose to watch and review The Demon, released in 1979. This was my second time watching The Demon, and I have to say that overall I enjoy the movie, but my biggest complaint would be this DVD release. Now, I really do like the DVD cover art, but the transfer on the DVD is pretty rough. A lot of the nighttime scenes are really dark, and it's just really hard to see everything that's going on. Of course, this was a common issue with low-budget movies of this time period, so this is definitely one that could use a updated release. The best way for me to describe this movie is that it's very similar to Halloween. Now, it doesn't take place on Halloween, but you can definitely tell they were inspired by John Carpenter's Halloween while they were making The Demon. The movie opens up with the killer breaking into a isolated family home. He attacks the mother but does not kill her. He kidnaps the 14-year-old daughter and escapes off into the woods around the time the husband is showing up. Now, we don't actually get to see what happens to this young girl, but we do hear her scream, and we do hear her clothes being ripped and torn. So that leads me to believe that one of the motivations of this killer is to rape the women that he attacks. The family hires a private investigator with psychic abilities to try to find their daughter and to track down the killer. From here, the killer will begin stalking a young schoolteacher who first notices the killer watching her through the school window, much like Laurie Strode notices Michael Myers watching her through the school window. It's a very similar setup. One of the things that I noticed that was really odd about this movie is that it has a lot of different set locations, which just makes the movie feel like it was pieced together. I totally get the opening sequence of the movie that takes place at the isolated family home, and from there you would want to progress the story to the main location of the movie. We get a suburban neighborhood location where the school teacher lives with her roommate, who is her cousin. We also have the school, and then we have the location where the killer is staying, in which is a big city urban looking setting that seems to throw everything off, in my opinion. Seeing how we have a killer who seems to like to take his time and stalk young women, it feels like he would have to do a lot of traveling because where he is staying seems like it's nowhere near the school teacher he is stalking. But of course, this could just be me nitpicking a little, but I was just trying to piece together how all these locations fit together, and the only way I really see the storyline working is if the killer's doing a lot of traveling. One thing that I thought was really cool about this movie was it was actually filmed in South Africa, and if that wouldn't have been mentioned in the special features, I would have never guessed it, because this movie basically looks like a typical American slasher movie, and other than people driving on the wrong side of the car, I would have never guessed that this movie was made in a foreign location. Something else that I wanted to mention, just because it has a unique name, and I feel like most people will agree with me, that there was a night disco club in this movie that was called Boobs Disco. I just thought that was a really good name for a night disco club. Overall, I enjoyed watching The Demon. It's a fun and entertaining low-budget slasher movie. I do have a few issues with it, and my biggest complaint is definitely the nighttime scenes being too dark to see everything that's going on. Other than that, I had a pretty fun time watching it. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the cast of characters we have in The Demon. And starting at the top with the opening of the movie, the family that is attacked by the killer, their daughter is kidnapped and murdered. Shortly after, the family hires a private investigator played by Cameron Mitchell, who at this point in his career in the late 70s was starting to be in a few other similar type of slasher movies, such as the Toolbox Murders and Haunts. And I have to say that he really hams it up with his performance in this movie. He plays as a private investigator with psychic abilities. He explains to the couple that has hired him to find their daughter that what he does must look like witchcraft to them, but explains that he's no medicine man or mystic man. He's basically a Dr. Loomis type character who's only here to build up the mystery that surrounds the killer. He refers to the killer as the Shadow Man and explains that he's less than a man and much more than a man, if that makes any sense whatsoever. We also have the school teacher and her cousin who are roommates. They also have boyfriends, but it's the cousins who will become the new focus of the killer. I did mention earlier that the killer stays in a big city, urban-looking environment, and basically what this does is we have random characters who show up throughout the movie. He's able to murder victims in dark alleyways, and pretty much all this does is add to the movie's overall body count, which in turn adds to the movie's overall entertainment value. Overall, I have to say that for the most part, I enjoyed the characters in this movie. I thought the acting was decent at best, but good enough for a late 70s slasher movie. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about the most important part of a slasher movie, that is the killer and the kills. So the killer in this movie is a little bit of a mixed bag for me. I like the idea of the killer. He's set up very similar to Michael Myers and reminds me a lot of the killer in Final Exam. And considering the killer in this movie is referred to as the demon, it's sort of hinted that he has supernatural abilities. But other than featuring some superhuman strength, we don't really get any details about any of these supernatural abilities, in which also seems very familiar to Michael Myers in the original Halloween. Something that I thought was really odd about the killer is that we have a scene where he is washing a white mask, which would imply that he is a masked killer. But when we actually do get to see him, we don't get a good look at his face. It always seems blurry or distorted looking, or it just simply looks like he's not wearing a mask at all. I just feel like that's a little bit of a missed opportunity to show us a really cool masked killer at least once in this movie. But something that really stood out about the killer was his black leather gloves with the metal claws at the end of his fingers. Unfortunately, it doesn't really seem like he uses these claws as a weapon, but more for ripping at clothing. And as far as the kills go in this movie, it does have a pretty decent body count, but as the back of the DVD's plot description would imply that the movie has blood, and more blood, that's just simply not the case, considering the killer's preferred method of murdering people is by simply strangling them with his bare hands, or putting a plastic bag over their heads and suffocating them that way, or by simply just breaking their necks. This movie just doesn't offer a lot of blood up until the final sequence. Then we finally do get a little bit of blood at the end of the movie. Unfortunately, this one's going to be a little hard for me to recommend. I do know that die-hard slasher movie fans will find some enjoyment out of this one. Myself, I thought it was decent. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Please like, subscribe, comment below. Let me know if you have seen The Demon, or just let me know what you think about my review. And as always, I'd like to thank you all for watching.